12 days after I buried my husband, I was standing under white string lights at my younger brother's engagement dinner when he raised a champagne glass and announced that I had 30 days to leave the workshop Daniel, and I had spent 6 years building together. I was 29 years old, still waking up every morning with my hand reaching across the bed for a man who was never coming back. And somehow my family had decided that was the perfect time to discuss what they believed I owed them. Chase smiled at the 20 relatives gathered in my parents' backyard in Columbus, Ohio, like he was about to give a sentimental toast. Instead, he set a brown folder beside the cake and said, "I know this isn't the easiest time, Ray, but Daniel wanted me to have Morgan Woodworks. He sold me his half before the accident." My mother pressed her lips together and gave me the look she had used since we were children whenever Chase wanted something that belonged to me. My father nodded as if the matter had already been decided. I stared at my brother. "My workshop?" I asked. Chase gave a little shrug. "Technically, it was Daniel's too. He borrowed money from me last year, and when he couldn't pay it back, we worked out a transfer. I didn't want to bring it up during the funeral, but I have investors waiting." Then he opened the folder and slid a notarized agreement across the patio table. According to the document, Daniel had transferred his ownership in the workshop building, the equipment inside it, and the half-acre parcel beneath it to Chase for $180,000. At the bottom was a signature that looked close enough to Daniel's that anyone who had only seen him sign birthday cards might have believed it. My father leaned toward me and lowered his voice as if he were trying to spare me embarrassment. "Your brother has already been patient. Daniel made a business decision. Don't turn this into some ugly family fight." I looked at the date on the agreement. Then I looked at Chase. I did not cry. I did not yell. I did not accuse him of anything. I simply folded the copy in half and slipped it into my purse. Chase's smile faltered. "Well?" he asked. I said, "That's interesting." My mother immediately snapped. "Rachel, don't start." I almost laughed. Not because anything about Daniel's death was funny, but because my brother had built his entire plan around one assumption that was completely wrong. Daniel had not owned a single percentage of that property on the date written on Chase's agreement. 11 months earlier, after we refinanced the equipment and reorganized the business, Daniel had legally transferred his interest in the building and land to an LLC that belonged solely to me. The deed had been recorded at the county recorder's office, and Daniel had been the one who insisted on doing it because I had used the inheritance from my grandmother to make the down payment before we were married. He used to joke that if he ever got hit by a bus, he did not want anyone from either side of our family turning my grief into a land grab. At the time, I had told him that was a terrible joke. Now I could hear his voice in my head so clearly that I had to grip the edge of my chair. Chase mistook my silence for weakness. "I have a buyer ready," he continued. "You can take Daniel's personal tools and whatever sentimental things you want. I'm not trying to be cruel." My father added, "Your brother has a child to think about. You have your drafting job. You'll be fine." That sentence hurt more than Chase's fake document. I had been fine my entire life. When Chase wrecked Dad's truck at 19, I loaned him the deductible. When he dropped out of community college, I covered 3 months of his rent because Mom said he was depressed. When his daughter Emma needed dental surgery 2 years later, I paid what insurance did not cover because Chase said his credit cards were maxed out. Every time I helped, my parents called me dependable. Every time Chase needed something else, they called it family. I stood, picked up my coat, and kissed my 7-year-old niece on the head, because none of this was her fault. Chase called after me. "We need your signature by Friday, Ray." I turned at the gate and asked, "For what?" He looked confused for half a second, then recovered. "To acknowledge the transfer and release any marital claim Daniel left you." I nodded slowly. "Send me everything in writing." My father said, "Why are you making this difficult?" I looked directly at him. "I'm not. I'm making it documented." Then I drove away. 40 minutes later, I was sitting at Daniel's old desk in the workshop office, with the lights off except for the lamp over his drafting table. His coffee mug was still on the shelf where I had left it the morning after the funeral because moving it felt too much like admitting he was gone. I opened my laptop, pulled up the county property portal, and downloaded the recorded deed showing the building belonged to Mercer Design Holdings, my LLC. Then I called our attorney, Lauren Pierce, even though it was almost 10 at night. I expected voicemail. She answered on the second ring. I told her exactly what had happened. When I finished, she was quiet for 3 seconds and said, "Do not sign anything. Do not threaten anyone. Send me the document your brother gave you. And tomorrow morning we are ordering certified copies of every filing connected to that property." I asked, "Can he actually do anything with that paper?" Lauren said, "Not legally, but people can create very expensive problems with fraudulent paperwork. We're going to find out whether this is just a stupid bluff or whether he has already used it somewhere." Before we hung up, I remembered one more thing. Daniel had replaced the workshop security system 8 months earlier after several walnut slabs and 2 expensive routers disappeared. I logged into the cloud archive. The system had been set to retain 6 months of footage. I stared at the screen and felt the first cold spark of something other than grief. Chase thought I was a widow standing alone in a dark building. What he did not know was that Daniel had spent the last year teaching me to keep records of everything. The next morning, before I had finished my first cup of coffee, my phone began filling with messages from cousins, suppliers, and people I had not spoken to since high school. Chase had posted a long statement online saying that Daniel had secretly planned to bring him into the business and that I was now refusing to honor my dead husband's wishes because I could not stand to see my brother succeed. My mother shared it with a comment about grief making people cling to things that were never really theirs. My father added that he hoped I would choose family over money before permanent damage was done. By 8:30, one of Daniel's longtime lumber suppliers had called to ask whether Chase was taking over purchasing. By 9, a cabinet company we regularly subcontracted for had forwarded me an email Chase sent from a newly created address using the name Morgan Woodworks Transition Team. In that email, he claimed there was an ownership dispute and instructed vendors not to enter new agreements with me until the matter was resolved. I forwarded everything to Lauren without replying publicly. At 9:40, she called and said, "Ray, your brother filed a UCC financing statement yesterday claiming a security interest in the equipment." I felt my stomach tighten. "Can he do that?" I asked. "Anyone can submit paperwork," she said. "That does not mean the claim is valid." But this just moved beyond a bad family conversation. He is trying to create a paper trail that makes him look like a creditor. I asked what she wanted me to do. "Go to work. Keep the doors locked. Do not meet him alone. I'm filing a formal dispute and sending preservation notices today." That last word mattered to me. Preservation. I started preserving everything. At 11:15, 2 white moving trucks pulled into the gravel lot behind the workshop. Chase climbed out of the first truck with my father and 3 men wearing work gloves. I stepped outside but stayed behind the locked loading door. Chase knocked hard on the glass and shouted, "Open up, we're taking an inventory." I held up my phone and said through the glass, "You have no permission to enter." Dad moved close enough that his face filled the window. "Stop acting like a child. These men are billing by the hour." I said, "Then you should send them home." Chase shook the folder from the night before in the air. "I own this place." I answered, "Send that statement to my attorney?" Dad slammed his palm against the glass. "You're really going to hide behind a lawyer 12 days after your husband's funeral?" For the first time, I felt anger rise fast enough to burn through the numbness. I wanted to unlock the door and tell him exactly what kind of father corners his newly widowed daughter over property before her husband's obituary has even disappeared from the local paper. Instead, I looked at the security camera above his head. "Dad, you and Chase are being recorded. If either of you tries to force your way inside, I'm calling the police." Chase laughed. "Record whatever you want. By Friday, this won't be yours." They left after 10 minutes. but not before Chase walked the three movers around the side of the building and pointed at the loading bays as though he were already planning where to park his own trucks. That afternoon, Lauren called again. Her voice had changed. It had the clipped, careful tone she used when facts had become serious. "I found a purchase agreement," she said. "Chase signed a contract 3 weeks ago to sell your workshop property to a development company called Buckeye Urban Partners." I sat down hard in Daniel's chair. 3 weeks ago? Daniel had died 16 days earlier. "He signed it before Daniel's funeral?" Lauren said. "Yes. He represented himself as an authorized owner. The sale price is $1.6 million. The buyer placed a $50,000 earnest money deposit into escrow." I closed my eyes. Chase had not created the story at his engagement dinner because grief had made him reckless. He had planned the sale while Daniel was still in the funeral home. Lauren continued. "There's more. Your father signed the contract as a witness to Chase's claimed authority." I opened my eyes. "My dad knew? His signature is on the document." For a moment, I could hear nothing but the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then someone knocked at the front door. I looked through the office glass and saw Susan Bell, the 56-year-old bookkeeper Daniel had used for years before we moved most accounting in-house. She held a cardboard file box against her hip. I had not seen her since the funeral. When I let her in, she hugged me without saying anything, and that almost broke me more than everything my family had done. After a minute, she set the box on Daniel's desk and said, "He told me if anything ever happened to him, and if Chase came asking questions about the workshop, I was supposed to bring this to you." I stared at her. "When did he tell you that?" Susan swallowed. "In January." She opened the box. Inside were printed bank ledgers, inventory sheets, screenshots of text messages, and a thumb drive with Daniel's handwriting on a strip of masking tape. It said Chase. Susan said quietly, "Your husband thought your brother was stealing from the business." That evening, Susan and I sat at the long assembly table where Daniel used to sand cabinet doors, and for the first time since his death, I learned there had been an entire problem he had been trying to solve without burdening me. Chase had never officially worked for Morgan Woodworks, but Daniel sometimes paid him cash for deliveries when we were overloaded. Starting the previous summer, expensive materials began disappearing in small enough amounts that no single loss seemed dramatic. A stack of white oak here, specialty hardware there, then 2 cordless toolkits, then $3,000 worth of copper sheet intended for a hotel bar project. Daniel suspected a supplier at first. Then the new security system caught Chase entering the workshop twice after midnight using a code Daniel had given him for emergency pickups. In one clip, Chase loaded sealed boxes into his SUV. In another, my father's truck pulled alongside the rear door at 1:17 in the morning. Susan showed me a spreadsheet Daniel had built comparing missing inventory with deposits into Chase's personal account. The numbers did not prove where the money came from, but the timing was ugly. Then she plugged in the thumb drive. One audio file was dated 6 weeks before Daniel's accident. Daniel's voice came through the laptop speakers, tired but calm. "Chase, I'm asking you one more time. Did you remove the Festool routers from the West cage?" My brother answered, "I borrowed them." Daniel said, "You sold them." "I found the marketplace listing." Chase snapped, "You and Ray have more money than you know what to do with. I needed cash." Then my father's voice entered the recording. "I had to replay it because I did not want to believe it." Dad said, "Daniel, don't blow up the family over tools. Chase has opportunities you two don't understand." Daniel answered, "Stealing from my shop isn't an opportunity." Dad replied, "Then sell him a stake. He has a developer interested in the property. You could all make money." Daniel said no. My father pushed. Daniel said no again. Finally, Daniel said something that made my throat close. "The property isn't mine to sell. It belongs to Ray's LLC. Her grandmother's money bought it. I'm not letting Chase turn my wife's building into another one of his rescue projects." The file ended there. Susan looked at me and said, "He was scared they were going to try something with paperwork. That's why he asked me to keep copies away from the shop." I sat perfectly still. The grief I had been carrying changed shape. Until that moment, part of me had felt guilty for not knowing Daniel was worried. Now I realized he had been protecting me even while he was angry and exhausted. I asked Susan if there was more. She pulled out an envelope Daniel had mailed to her office the week before his accident. Inside was a photocopy of an old contractor agreement bearing Daniel's signature and a sticky note that read, "If Chase suddenly produces something with my signature, compare it to this." He scanned this page when he helped me with the insurance renewal. I called Lauren. She came to the workshop within an hour with a paralegal and listened to the recordings herself. She did not smile when she finished. "This is not the movie version where we jump out from behind a curtain and yell gotcha," she said. "We're going to do this cleanly. First, we authenticate the files. Second, we notify the buyer's counsel that ownership is disputed and provide the recorded deed. Third, we demand that your brother identify every document he is relying on. Most importantly, you do not reveal everything you have." I asked why. Lauren said, "Because right now Chase believes his forged transfer is strong enough to support a sale. If he doubles down in writing, he removes his own ability to later claim confusion." The next morning, under Lauren's direction, I sent one short email to Chase and copied Dad. "Please identify the exact amount you claim Daniel owed you, the date the debt was created, the date the property interest was transferred, and what you want me to sign on Friday." Chase responded within 20 minutes. He said Daniel owed him $180,000 from a private loan, that Daniel transferred ownership voluntarily, and that I needed to sign a spousal release by 5 p.m. Friday, or he would take every available step to protect his investment. Dad replied all and wrote, "If you refuse, we will contact every client and vendor connected to Morgan Woodworks and explain that you are holding property that belongs to your brother. We have already begun doing so." Lauren called me 30 seconds later. "Save that email in 3 places," I said. "Already did." For the first time, she laughed. Then on Thursday afternoon, the title company handling Buckeye Urban Partners' purchase called me directly. The closing officer, a woman named Gloria, sounded nervous. "Miss Morgan, I'm trying to verify a signature on a property authorization. Your brother represented that Daniel Mercer signed an amendment granting him authority to sell the parcel." I asked her to email it. When it arrived, I opened the attachment and immediately recognized Daniel's signature, but not from a business contract. It was the exact signature from the old insurance renewal page Susan had shown me, right down to a tiny ink skip through the letter D caused by a dying pen. Someone had lifted the signature and placed it onto a new document. Gloria then said something that opened the next door. "There is also a financing condition. Your brother is not simply selling the property. He has pledged the sale proceeds as repayment on a $650,000 private note." I asked, "Whose note?" She hesitated. "The borrower is Chase Morgan. The guarantor is Harold Morgan, my father." Suddenly, the entire thing made sense. They were not trying to give Chase a chance. They were trying to save themselves from a debt they had hidden from everyone else. By Friday morning, Lauren's investigator had confirmed what that debt was. Chase and my father had spent 18 months buying and flipping 3 neglected rental houses through a side company they never told my mother about. The first project had gone over budget. The second had been hit with foundation problems. The third sat half-renovated and empty while interest accumulated. Dad had guaranteed Chase's loans because he believed a downtown developer would eventually buy our workshop parcel and make them whole. Daniel had refused to participate. After he died, Chase and Dad apparently convinced themselves that grief had created a window before I would understand what they were doing. They forged a transfer, signed a sale contract, and planned to use the $1.6 million purchase price to erase their $650,000 debt and leave Chase with enough cash to start over. The one thing they needed was my signature, because the buyer's title company would not insure the transaction without resolving my recorded ownership. That was why Friday mattered. At 11:30, my mother called for the first time since the engagement dinner. She did not ask if I was sleeping. She did not ask whether I had eaten. She said, "Your father is beside himself. Please stop punishing everyone and come to dinner tonight. Chase's buyer is willing to wait until 8. We can settle this privately. I asked, "Who will be there?" She said, "Your father, Chase, me, Mr. Dorsey from the development company, and the notary. Maybe Lauren if you insist on bringing her." Her voice softened into the tone she used when she wanted me to remember that I was the daughter who fixed things. "Ray, sweetheart, your brother made mistakes, but he has Emma to think about. If this deal falls apart, he could lose everything." There it was again, Chase's crisis becoming my obligation. I said, "I'll be there at 7. Before hanging up, Mom whispered, "Thank you. I knew you'd come to your senses." At 6:45, Lauren and I pulled into my parents' driveway. I carried one slim black binder. She carried nothing. Dad opened the door before we knocked and immediately stared at Lauren. "I thought this was a family conversation," he said. I replied, "It stopped being one when you filed paperwork against my property." In the dining room, Chase sat beside a silver-haired man I recognized from Buckeye Urban Partners. A notary I had never met sat at the other end with a laptop and stamp case. My mother had put out roast chicken, potatoes, and Daniel's favorite green beans, which felt so grotesquely normal that for 1 second I wanted to turn around and leave. Chase pointed to a stack of documents. "We don't need to drag this out," he said. "Sign the release, and you'll receive $100,000 from the sale as a goodwill payment." Lauren raised an eyebrow. I sat down. "Before I sign anything, I want to make sure I understand what everyone is saying." Dad leaned back and crossed his arms. "We've explained it a dozen times." I looked at Chase. "You're saying Daniel borrowed $180,000 from you?" "Yes. And because he couldn't repay it, he transferred ownership in the workshop?" "Yes." "And Dad witnessed that agreement?" My father answered, "I did." "And both of you believe that gave Chase authority to sell the land to Mr. Dorsey?" Dad said, "Correct." Mr. Dorsey shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I turned to him. "Did Chase tell you I own the property through Mercer Design Holdings?" The room went quiet. Chase said quickly, "That's just a technical shell Daniel used." I opened my binder and placed a certified copy of the deed on the table. "No. This is a recorded deed from 11 months before Daniel died. It transferred the building and land into my LLC. Daniel signed the transfer. I accepted it. The county recorded it. Daniel had no ownership interest left to transfer to Chase." Mr. Dorsey picked up the certified copy and read it. The color changed in his face. Dad snapped, "That doesn't mean the debt disappeared." I said, "There was no debt." Chase laughed too loudly. "Now you're just lying." I slid a second page forward. "Then explain why the signature on your transfer agreement is digitally identical to Daniel's signature on a 2-year-old insurance form, including the same ink defect." The notary at the end of the table stopped touching her laptop. Chase stared at the page. I continued, "And before you decide how you want to answer that, you should know Daniel suspected you were stealing from the workshop months ago. He backed up the security footage. He also recorded a conversation in which Dad told him to sell you a stake, and Daniel said the property belonged to me, and he would not do it." My mother whispered, "Harold?" Dad ignored her and glared at me. "You recorded us?" I said. "Daniel did." In his own workshop, Chase stood so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. "This is insane. Daniel promised me." Lauren spoke for the first time. "Sit down, Mr. Morgan." He looked at her. She said calmly, "Buckeye Urban Partners Council received the certified ownership record this morning. The closing has been suspended. The title company has also preserved every document submitted in support of your transaction, including the authorization bearing Mr. Mercer's copied signature." Mr. Dorsey turned toward Chase. "You told us the widow had a sentimental claim, not legal title." Chase snapped. "She was supposed to sign." I looked at him. "That's the part you keep missing. I was never supposed to do anything." Dad slammed his palm on the table. "Enough. Your brother is in trouble. He has debts. I helped him because that's what a father does. If you destroy this sale, the lender will come after both of us." Mom turned slowly toward him. "What lender?" Dad froze. Chase closed his eyes. My mother's voice changed. Harold, what did you do? He said nothing. I took out the last document, a copy of the financing condition from the title file. Dad guaranteed $650,000 for Chase's real estate projects. They were counting on selling my workshop to pay it off. Mom looked from the paper to my father like she did not recognize him. Chase's face twisted with panic. Ray, please. You don't understand. I can fix everything if this closes, I said. No, you can fix what you created without taking what belongs to me. He pointed toward the hallway where photographs of Emma covered the wall. So what happens to my daughter? You want her father bankrupt? That was the oldest trick in our family. Place an innocent child between me and Chase's consequences. I felt my chest ache because I loved Emma. I had helped tie her shoes, picked her up from kindergarten, sat with her at the dentist when Chase was late. But loving her did not require financing her father's fraud. I said, Emma will always have an aunt who loves her. What she will not have is an aunt who buys her father out of every disaster he creates. Dad stood. You think you're better than us because Daniel left you that business. I looked at him and felt something inside me become still. Daniel didn't leave me permission to be used. Neither did Grandma when she gave me the money to buy that property. Lauren closed the binder. For clarity, the fraudulent filing has been reported to the county recorder and the lender. My client is also pursuing damages for interference with her business and the costs caused by the false lien. Any further contact about the property goes through my office. Chase's anger disappeared as quickly as it had come. He sat back down and said in a broken voice, You're really doing this to me? I answered, No, brother. You did it. I'm just not taking it away from you this time. 4 months later, the workshop sounded different without Daniel, but it no longer felt haunted. For the first few weeks after that dinner, I could barely walk past his bench without crying. Grief did not disappear because I won a property dispute, and I learned quickly that justice is not the same thing as healing. Lauren helped remove the fraudulent filing. Buckeye Urban Partners terminated the purchase contract, and Chase had to return the earnest money he had already used to cover unrelated bills. The lender pursued him and Dad under the guarantee they had signed. Their attorney negotiated instead of letting everything explode into the kind of courtroom spectacle my family had threatened me with. Chase eventually pleaded guilty to a reduced forgery-related charge connected to the false authorization and received probation, restitution, and community service. Dad was not sent to prison. He did, however, lose the consulting position he had held with a local construction company after the lender's lawsuit became public, and he spent a year selling assets and restructuring debt he had hidden from my mother. Those consequences were enough. I did not need sirens in my parents' driveway or my brother dragged away in handcuffs to know the pattern had finally broken. The harder consequence was the one none of them could blame on a judge. I stopped rescuing them. I blocked Chase from my business accounts. I told my parents I would not discuss his loans, legal bills, or housing problems. When Mom called crying 2 weeks later and said, "But he's your brother," I answered, "Yes, Mom. That describes our relationship. It does not create a debt." She hung up on me. For years, that would have sent me racing to repair the damage. This time I made dinner, sat on the back steps of the workshop, and let her be angry. I did one thing for Emma, because she was innocent, and because I wanted the help to be clean. I opened a small education account that only I controlled and arranged to pay her summer art program directly. I did not give Chase cash. I did not announce what I was doing. I simply refused to make a child pay for the behavior of adults. In early spring, I changed the sign outside the shop from Morgan Woodworks to Mercer Workshop and Design. I kept Daniel's name on the smaller plaque beneath it. Once a month, we now host a Saturday training session for young women who want to learn cabinetry, drafting, and finish work. The first morning we opened the class, I found Daniel's old pencil behind a drawer in his bench. It was worn down to 3 inches, teeth marks near the eraser, exactly the way he always left them. I sat on the floor and cried so hard I could not breathe. Then I laughed because I could almost hear him saying, "Ray, pencils are not sentimental objects." I put it in my desk anyway. Losing Daniel taught me that some things deserve to be held on to. What my family did afterward taught me something equally important. Some things have to be released, even when they share your last name. I spent most of my life believing love meant being the person everyone could count on, no matter what it cost me. Now I know love without boundaries becomes permission. My brother thought my grief made me weak. My father thought being his daughter meant I would eventually obey. My mother thought guilt could turn my property into family property. They were all wrong about the same thing. I did not need to destroy them to take my life back. I only needed to stop saving them from what happened when I finally said no.